Hello, everyone, as you're joining us. Welcome to today's first Behavior and Beyond webinar series with myself, Jen Colchin, and my colleague, Sharon Paley. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
And we're very glad that you are here with us today. Sharon, I might throw open to you to maybe give a bit of context as to where this idea came from and its purpose.
Okay. Some of you will be aware that Jen does a wonderful podcast where she talks to lots of really interesting people. And I was one of those people, probably not as, perhaps I obviously was interested, but I was one of those people. So had a little chat to Jen. And as we were going around and about our business doing different things, we were both getting a lot of feedback from people about how much they'd enjoyed listening to us. And not once, but on several occasions, and also by email, I had people saying to me, certainly, it'd be really nice to hear you and Jen just talking because we enjoyed those conversations so much. Um, and so that's really where it emerged from. So I came back to Jen and said, look, this has been said to me a few times. And Jen said, that's funny. A few people have said that to me too. So we thought we'd give it a bit of a go and do it over a lunchtime period so you can sit and eat your lunch at your desk and do something other than keep working.
So we're really glad that you're here with us today. We're going to leave everyone's cameras and mics off, but if you would like to ask a question, you can please put it in the chat or make a comment. If someone's asked a question that you're like, yes, I really like that question, or I want to support that, give it a like, give it some love, and we'll make sure that we hit on that as we go. Sharon and I, we were doing it even before we started. We just start talking about a thing and we just start going off, and so we'll do our best, and Emma's here to help just bring our attention back to any burning desires or burning questions in the comments. We put out some polls and some info on social media just to generate what do people, just some questions that people want to hear or want to hear discussed, things that are pressing to them as practitioners, whether from a practice point of view, from an ethics point of view. The questions that we got, we received probably 20 or 30 questions so far. And the ones we got, there's sort of general categories around behavior, around the NDIS, around restrictive practices. We get a lot of those questions, and we're very keen to dive into those. Ethics, as well as just practice support. So with our next session, our next webinar is going to be on the 3rd of December, which is International Day of Disability. So we're going to make the theme of that session about human rights. And we'll be focusing on a lot of those rights-based questions and where RPs kind of fit into a rights-based context. That's what we'll be looking at that session. And today we thought we would just start with some general behavior questions. And I had an additional question that I was pondering for Sharon that I asked her in the beginning before everyone came in and we started talking. So we will get back to that. Sharon, where do you want to start? Do we
I
want
don't
to?
mind. You just throw things at
Please do.
me
Like,
and
if you
we'll.
came here today and you're like, I came because I have this question, I really want to hear your perspective on it. I really want to hear this discussed. Please do type it into the chat. One of the things I find, one of the recurring, one of the recurring themes seems to be practitioners who are facing a number of moral injuries, if I can use that
Mm,
terminology, of trying to balance giving quality support and person-centered support with against ever more rising barriers
mm-mm,
around compliance, around resources, around limitations, around support, around buy-in. And one of the resounding questions that we kept going over and over, or getting over and over, was how do we balance actually good person-centered support when we are also trying to manage things like our compliance and tick boxes that actually feel like they pull us
mm.
away from that core value that a lot of us have coming into PBS, is to actually improve people's quality of life.
Well, and I'll tell you what I think at the moment. I think that question is more complex than it initially sounds,
Mm,
and you can sort of break it down into probably three pieces. But the first bit around that I'd like to just mention, one of my concerns is the way in which this year people all of a sudden found that um, item items they could claim for suddenly attracted less income.
Yeah.
And that was part of the pressure for people, whether it was travel or whether you were affected as a clinician or a therapist working in one of the areas where, they weren't able to claim as much funding, they had that reduced. And I suppose that's part of this moral injury question, because if we
Mm.
look at our workforce, and apologies to some of the gentlemen who are here, but and you only have to look at the NDS annual review of the workforce. We are a predominantly female workforce. So I asked the question, how many other workforces would have actually, and I know we didn't accept it quietly, I'm not suggesting that, but would a government make a decision to reduce what they were paying? Not even keep it the same, but to reduce that. And I do have that question about, well, did that feel a bit easier because it's actually a gender-based decision,
And
and underlying this because it's a predominantly female workforce. There are more people in our workforce who work casual or part-time as well than in many other workforces. So that's
and it's a much more casual workforce too now. So there's less entitlements, there's less things like long service leave, there's
mm,
less, which we also know that there's quite a gender disparity within that as well
mm.
in the workforce. Do
So
you,
what? Go
but
on.
also at the same time, though, I find it really interesting, and this is one of the difficulties with the workforce and disability is that there's been all this focus on aged care, and aged care has gotten a boost and
Mm,
has actually a lot of the workforce has moved from disability service into aged care because it's better pay, more.
mm,
I'm not as well versed in aged care, but from my understanding, that is one of the barriers is that disability work is
mm.
so undervalued.
Absolutely. And I think that's so we've got a whole picture there um, that we're looking at of a workforce that's undervalued, but this ability, the ability of a government, a federal government at that, to make a decision that actually reduces the income to a large part of that workforce, I think and whilst people weren't quiet about it, that decision so far hasn't changed. I know there has been a redress in art therapy, music therapies, and some of those therapies, but in the majority of that decision remains unchanged since that time. It's as if that didn't matter,
And it
and
was
the
so
fact that they
quick.
even felt able to do it.
It
Yeah,
was so quick. There was
yeah,
very little notice, very little turnaround.
mm,
And that's a moral injury of itself to for providers who are trying to do the right thing and make ends meet to suddenly have this massive change to people who are on a salary, on a payroll. That in of itself is, I think it's a bit reckless without
Well, I
giving
I think
advance
that's the
notice.
start of that moral injury that you spoke about there,
Mm.
because it then creeps out into those other areas like the greater compliance. So on one level, we've got a reduced income, but over here, we've got increased compliance. So we're expected to continue to deliver high quality supports and to drive up the quality of our supports and to continuously improve. Of course, I've no argument with that. We deliver human services. We've got to strive to do the best we can for people.
Yeah.
But most people do come into disability services, let's not kid ourselves, because they have an urge and a desire to serve a certain community. They're not planning on becoming, the next millionaire. They're not, Apple and Facebook type tycoons. Let's be fair. They're people who are opening often very small businesses and generating employment in their local area. And all of a sudden, we've got these changes happening and they're just supposed to accommodate that. And in the wake of all that, as a supervisor, I spoke to people who were really struggling, particularly in central Queensland, to understand how they were actually going to to continue to deliver their services to some
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
and actually maintain contact, physical contact with them, because a 2 or 3 hour journey there. They see the person, a 2 or 3 hour journey home.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
and
think
they've got that several times over in their caseload.
it feels a bit like perhaps the NDIS is relying on well-intentioned practitioners providing services for pro bono because
Yeah.
they won't abandon participants for exactly that reason. But the other thing that really gets me about that travel at the same time of looking at saying we're going to emphasize compliance by removing the travel from practitioners, behavior support practitioners, allied health, OT, that's removing a really important safeguard component for people
Mm,
living in sills in homes because we were the ones going into the home saying, hey, why is that locked? Hey, why is that restricted? Hey, where's all the food? Like, there's the basic questions. And it also it kills me that it denies the what the evidence says about the efficacy of support and service, and particularly therapeutic services, that they are most effective when they are delivered in the person's natural environment. And we both know, in fact, most people here know, that there are significant barriers for some individuals who are living rurally, who might have complex
mm,
needs, who might have additional needs. It's hard to get a taxi as a person in a
yeah.
wheelchair. So it's made it prohibitively difficult even for people to access services. And I wonder, because there's no real strong communication, how these decisions are being made and which parts are talking to the other. Like, I wonder if anyone talked to anyone from behavior support to say, hey, is there anything we haven't considered here, for
I
example?
think they're knee jerk. I think they're knee jerk to public opinion about, you know, there's been a lot of bad press about how much the NDIS is costing,
Mm-hmm.
and and so then government worries about, well, how does that look? Well, we've got to look like we're doing something to pull that back in. Oh, here's a good way to do it. I think a lot of it's just knee jerk, and it's kind of like there's a word for it, isn't there? But
But
where
if that's
they
the
apply
intention,
to the populist view.
yeah. If that's the intention, if the intention is to curb spending, I'd say it's being successful. But at what other expense? And
Mm,
because it also shifts that expense onto other services. When people have unmet needs and you don't actually provide the supports to meet their needs in happy, healthy ways, those needs don't just go away. They just
no.
get pushed elsewhere. So when people don't get adequate manual handling support, or when they don't get adequate staffing ratios, or when they don't get actual dysphagia support, or any, because disabilities are pervasive and lifelong, those needs don't go away. It means now we're spending more time in the hospital. Now we're having to spend time with emergency services and ambulances and whatever, and public mental health. And so in my view, it actually is a short term, it's a myopic kind of putting a band-aid on a broken leg, because it actually doesn't save the taxpayer any
Mm,
money in the long term. It just shifts it
no.
onto under
It
other
just
areas.
yeah, it does. It just shifts it to other areas of public spending. That's part of the problem, but they're masked better than the
Yeah.
NDIS is.
Yeah.
That's the critical thing. But what gets lost in that is the human in that, who then has to have multiple admissions to hospital, where if they'd been funded appropriately in the first place, could have been supported effectively at home. And so what we're doing is we're reinstitutionalizing a population of people with disability. If you look at it like that, for a population of people with disability, we've gone back 30 years, because now what we're doing to mask this funding issue is we're forcing them into hospital beds
We're
and placing
medicalizing it
and
again.
medicalizing, yeah. And 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 all this business of, oh well, we're going to argue the toss about what we see as medical care. It is another aspect of just fudging that issue. You know, I mean, I'm a nurse by background, and one of the things I'm doing at the moment is liaising with a consultant, family, and people with disability Australia around this issue of not funding nurses appropriately or at the level that they need to be for people, and concerns around. And people probably in the wider sector aren't aware of this. There's a lot of concern around a particular court judgment that was made related to the delivery of nursing care and who should be doing that, and the fact that it ought to be nurses and not unqualified social care staff,
Like,
but
who else
when we're
would be
talking
it
about
if not
nursing,
nurses? Like,
yeah, but but what but you only have to look at the high intensity supports, and when they came out, I nearly died because I sort of thought, I know they've been written by a group of clinicians, but the reality is, when you read that, a suitably qualified health practitioner or whatever, who is that suitably qualified health practitioner? Well, it sure as eggs isn't going to be a doctor. Let's be fair.
mm,
It's likely going to fall to a nurse. And I looked at that as a registered nurse and thought, would I, as a registered nurse, not employed within that organisation, be prepared to go in and train people in that and have oversight of it? Yeah, not a chance. Not a chance, because that places my registration on the line. The other thing is, when you actually consider the nurses' code of conduct, some of what's being asked of nurses is contradictory to their code of conduct. So there's a whole host of issues here that haven't really been thought through.
well, can I just own that then? This is something that I see in my
Mm,
practice, where some people who are living in SIL houses or SIL environments where they need manual handling, let's say, and the OT has said, yes, this person is bariatric weight. They weigh, 300 kilos safely. We need at least 2-to-1 manual handling. And the India says, no, you can do with 1-to-1. And then the organization, it sits on the organization, doesn't it? Because they
mm,
have to balance that duty of care and that for their staff
mm,
with a lack of resources. So either they have to fund it themselves, for
mm.
example, or they have to tell the participant, hey, if you don't get this money, you got to go.
Yeah. Well, and
And what do
invariably,
nurses do in that situation? Like what is the responsibility to both staff and participants in that circumstance?
invariably, what I would say is that services are ending up funding cares that they're not getting funding for. That's
And,
what's happening.
and that's why they're struggling,
Mm. Yeah,
a lot of them.
absolutely.
Mm.
And I mean, if you look at the at where we started, originally, which was around this sense of moral injury and injustice and the compliance issues as well. And I'll take us back to that. And some people who've heard me talk about um, the unintended and often unfortunate consequences of compliance. So I apologize for those of you who've heard me rant on about this before. But when we shift from a supportive model of compliance, i.e., continuous improvement, and we shift to a compliance heavy model of compliance, what happens is organizations start to fund more in their risk management portfolio. So they start to upskill that area and fund more there. When you start doing that, what you actually do as an organization is you take your mind off the front ball. You take your mind off what's happening in the coalface, because actually your focus is how to ensure we're demonstrating compliance, which, let's be honest, is mostly around policy, procedure, reporting, recording. That's how you're demonstrating that compliance.
Mm.
But that isn't necessarily played out in practice. So what you've done is take really important resources, often dollars, and you've put them in the back end of the organization in order to sustain the compliance work. But that ultimately impacts the front end of the organization. Now, an unintended consequence of that is that we sometimes end up with less staff. The staff who we often rip out in those circumstances is the middle management. And it's the middle management who can tell you what's happening in the front
Mhm.
end of services.
Mhm.
They keep their eye on the ball, if you like, and it gives airspace to toxic practices, is what happens where we shift to a compliance model. And there's some fairly good, if dated, evidence around that. And if you look very often at some of the historic inquiries that have happened into big institutions where terrible abuse has happened, you can sort of see that picture being replicated in those reviews and reports that have looked at it, looked at what went wrong. And basically, you've got top heavy organizations, churning over the compliance and the risk and managing all that, but taking their eye off the front end. And that's not a criticism of providers at all. it's a criticism of the system because again, it was a knee-jerk reaction to something that happened in the periphery, and we all know what that was, you know, to, well, how can we be seen to do something to close this down? Oh, we'll become, you know, we'll step up the compliance.
And I've heard you say in the past, and I think you said this on one of the podcast episodes, that when the focus becomes overly myopic on compliance in isolation, and compliance becomes the measure, then that is what matters, not actually enhancing practice.
Mm,
And I've heard you say that the risk in that is that you actually, it doesn't change the practice, it just drives it underground.
yeah, because nobody's there to see it
And no
and
one's there to
challenge it.
actually no one's looking at the quality and
Yeah.
enhancing and the proactive universal things that actually lead to good lives. It's looking at, have we reduced this? What's our numbers? What's our, you know, are we meeting our compliance marks? But it's not looking at the greater context of, I think it's a short-sighted, it's a short-sighted goal to have. Like, it's a good goal to have, but that's
You're
not the
right.
goal in
Yeah.
isolation.
No, because what it does is it rips out those foundational supports.
Yeah.
So we end up, when we think about tiered models of support, you know, foundational models of foundational care, tertiary supports, um, you know, collaborative practice and intensive supports in that kind of, you know, tiered model. What you've done is just ripped out all the foundational supports. So you've only got those top tiers. So all you're doing is firefighting.
I have an idea of how we might be able to fix things in
Okay,
NGIS and
let's
behavior
all
support.
fix it together.
I don't know. I wonder, and this is going to be controversial for me to say this, but I do wonder if there is an avenue to go back to block funding for people with the most severe and profound disabilities. And that way, you know, and people who have, who are, and these are the people who are being exploited, who are being human trafficked for their $1 million NDIS plans, who are living in mini institutions for one.
Mm,
It's horrible. And I look at too what the NDIS is doing around the capability framework for behavior support practitioners, and now with the suitability reassessment, and there's a lot more questions than answers at the moment, a lot of sort of fear around practitioners, that there isn't a clear entry pathway, there isn't a clear progression pathway. And so I wonder if there is a role, like if we do say, hypothetically, if we say, okay, we're going to look at block funding for people who are being exploited or who do need that additional support, fine. And then who have significant behaviors with a significant risk of harm or whatever, I'm sure whatever algorithm they're going to be using with this assessment thing, however that,
mm.
um, maybe we do go back to block funding, and maybe the people who are being block funded, those are the ones that are being supported by specialists, and we actually advanced in specialists, and we actually delineate the capability framework levels, and we say, hey, at a core level, these are your skills, this is your capability. At proficient, these are your skills, this is what you're able to do. And it kind of says that now more as a suggestion. But I think if you have, let's say, people who are actually advanced and specialists who meet some sort of threshold criteria. They're the ones actually writing the assessments, doing these assessments. And the people who are lower, let's say like new entry, core, even proficient, they could be in the houses through that block funding, actually doing capacity building support on site with the staff, doing coaching, feedback, modeling, things like universal strategies, proactive support, environmental adjustments. And I think if you looked at that and they're be implementing the plans that are being written by the advanced and specialists, it's also a clear pathway for them to get to that point. You can even delineate the price points. Let's say we go back to the 232 and the 19, I don't know, whatever. But
Yeah.
it's a clear pathway. But I think more and more the emphasis really needs to be on embedding good practice on the ground.
Well, and I'd never sort of considered that as an option. And that's something I'll ruminate for a little while now. You sort of put that out there because there's nothing that you've said there that doesn't make complete sense. And um, so yeah, why wouldn't it be considered, I suppose? And I think you
There's a
raised
real
an
pushback in some
mm,
pockets in the NDIS about um, that choice and control element.
mm,
And that's where a lot of that pushback I think often comes from, even around registration and using registered providers. Like there's a very strongly there is a very strong cohort that speak very strongly on those sorts of issues. I think that's maybe one of the
That's
that
the
would be the
objection.
primary.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's nothing you've said that doesn't make sense and wouldn't solve a number of problems. I suppose as always, you solve one problem and sometimes create others. That's one of
Think
the
of how much
difficulties.
more
And I think that's
cost
one of the things we're
effective.
seeing play out.
Yeah, it'd be so much more cost effective too.
Mm.
Like if you block funded it and yeah, like if you give because the staff on the ground, they're not getting robust training by and large. Like it's just the way that the sector is set up. And we were talking about this before we started recording, is that, or even now, like the staff don't, it's seen as the role of the provider to be funding that training, and they're just not getting it. And so people are, I think a lot of times staff are kind of set up to fail.
Well,
Um,
I think there's the whole issue there is, let if we're honest, is that for providers to enable somebody to attend training, they've then got to backfill their position, you know. So you've got the double cost there, plus the
yeah,
cost of the training,
yeah,
and then you train people up. And I saw somebody discussing this only this week on one of the Facebook pages. We train somebody up, and then they just use that to
they
get
just
a new
leave.
job.
Yeah,
So I think that, yeah, that it's a dilemma for providers because they're on this constant, almost hamster wheel of trying
they are.
to
Yeah,
where they do engage in that providing that training. They're on a constant hamster wheel of trying to do it, and it's just money, disappearing out of the organization again.
yeah. We
And
need
they've got to
practice
balance
coaches.
that with all their other, yeah, we do. We
We
need
need
to
practice
use
coaches in the houses and in the SIL environments and with the staff. That's what we need.
well, and also we know that the coaching models work. So we've got
Hmm.
a couple of questions.
Oh,
One says
even
it
if
can,
I was going to say, even you look at Brent Hayward's research, Brent Hayward, his thesis was on PBS implementation, and he talks about,
yeah.
I don't know which article, but if anyone who's interested, Brent Hayward does a lot, he has a lot of research on PBS implementation and some of the barriers and challenges around that kind of fit into what we're talking about. Sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
So it says it can be like the AHA model that some OTs utilize for implementation of skill development with some participants.
Hmm.
In
Yeah,
response to your point there. Thank you, David. And Karen asks or says, employers don't want to spend the money to train their staff, and staff, especially independent support workers, don't want the training. I run a training company as well, so it's hard to coordinate for the companies as there is so much resistance from staff.
why? Why are staff
Yeah.
resistant to training? Maybe Karen can type
Yeah.
in.
Karen, why do you think the
They
staff are
would,
resistant
they'd still be
to
getting paid
training?
for it,
That's interesting.
would they?
Independent independent support workers may not.
Oh, well, then there's your answer.
Yeah, so they would be resistant. They don't believe they need it. Ooh, that's scary. Like I think when you get to the point in your career where you think you don't need to go on training anymore, you probably need to
Oh,
find a new job.
I
Like,
see that in the chats where it's like, I want to become a behavior support
yeah,
practitioner as a new entry and I'm going to subcontract. I can do that, right? And everyone's like, please don't,
yeah, don't do that.
don't do that.
I mean, this idea that you get to this sort of a grandiose point where you don't need training anymore. I think, you're constantly learning new things.
Yeah,
As a nurse, I'm shocked by some attitudes of people. They have no formal qualifications and yet they want to charge $70 an hour for support.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember asking this conversation of the NDIS or when the NDIS was coming in, and I remember it vividly because I was pregnant with my eldest at the time, and she's now about to be 13. So this would have been like 2012. And I remember it was in a meeting, and I was working at the Department of Human Services, one of the BIS teams here in the East, and they were coming and telling us all about this NDIS. And they were at the time they were saying, "Oh, by the way, you all are out of a job within the next like year." This is in 2012 because the NDIS is
Hmm.
coming, and this is how it's going to work. And we were all like, "Okay, cool. Hey, quick question. You're gonna have so people with the highest support needs are gonna have the most funding. That's great. what safeguards and what oversight and compliance are you going to build into the system? Because, we have concerns given that the individuals that we support are highly vulnerable. They have a lot of unmet needs, a lot of unmet communication needs, often don't have robust supports. They'd be rife for exploitation. Hey, what are you going to do to protect that? And you get people with big buckets of money, open to exploitation. And the answer we got at the time was the free market will regulate itself.
I knew you were going to say that. It's one of my, sorry, I just had a drink. I nearly choked on it. It's one of my favorite things to trope out at people when they say, well, why this? Don't worry, the market is going to regulate itself.
The
Well, it
free
clearly
market.
isn't, is it? I mean, it isn't because you've just stepped up your compliance. So something went wrong somewhere. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so
So do you think, I mean, is there, if we're going back to this notion of moral hazard, does the NDIS need to take more responsibility for minimum standards and training standards for staff?
well, it'd be good if they could write a standard.
Just full stop.
Or like I'm just being a hypercritical here, but I have an issue about the capability framework as a set of standards, right? Because what were the it sort of said, these are the skills we would like you to have in this area, but it didn't tell us how we were going to measure them or what evidence we should look for.
Right.
And yet, people can be told, well, no, you don't meet this capability because you haven't shown us the right evidence. Well, that's because magically there's no document anywhere that tells us what it is. So
Yeah.
surely, if there is there a mysterious document that they have that we don't? I suspect not. So actually, it comes down to what somebody thinks on a particular day about somebody's self-assessment.
And the concern that I have
Uh,
too, and that I see now, especially with people coming and wanting their reassessment or their suitability assessment, is that they're being supported by supervisors who don't know what they don't know. And, maybe they're coming from education and maybe they know positive behavior support within a school-wide model. And now they're practicing in the NDIS, and they may know positive behavior support in that context, but they certainly don't know behavior support within an NDIS context and don't know
yeah,
anything about restrictive practices. So people will come and say, oh, and they practicing for 2, 3 years. They had a supervisor externally, and I'm the first one to give them an education about restrictive practices because their supervisor didn't know that, and just people not knowing what they don't know and the risks that are inherent with that. So as far as what the NDIS says, who can be a supervisor and what is the role of a supervisor and what qualifications and what training should you do in
well,
supervision?
they've got a project on that now, haven't they? So
Oh,
they've got this supervision project that they're doing. So soon we'll find out.
I hope
But
so.
but I suppose the issue is that we've got a bit of a market out there that's developed around supervision. Admittedly, I'm one of those people who offers supervision,
Yeah, me too.
that's already kind of developed in response to the need for supervision.
Yeah.
Um, so at some point, I'm assuming we'll receive some communication about what the standards look like and or I mean, I'm assuming standards, but what they
Yeah.
expect of supervisors or whatever.
Well,
But
like I know when I did my supervision, so as a board certified behavior analyst, if I wanted to be a supervisor as a BCBA, I had to do a mandatory 8-hour supervision course and I had to pass it. And that everybody who's a BCBA, if you want to be a supervisor, you have to meet that minimum standard. You have to do this 8-hour
yeah,
course so that at least there's some minimum
I had to do that as a
competencies.
registered nurse. We had a 2 day,
Yeah.
16 hour training that you had to do of clinical, it was called clinical teaching and supervision. You
And
had to
maybe
do
we
that.
should have a database. Maybe we
Mm.
should have some sort of training protocol and have a database that so people can actually know where to go and know that there's some sort of checks and balances with
So
supervisors as
we
well.
have got a few more people just to go back to the points that
Yeah,
people are making.
yeah.
Um, Karen just followed up by saying about people, it's probably similar to what I was saying, people giving out meds with no qualifications or understanding or even undertaking a short course.
Yeah.
especially concerns around restrictive practices. So I think, yeah, that might be something we want to come back to at some point. It's a very
Yeah.
hard situation, Rebecca says, because support working is seen as an entry level position, and a university degree or TAFE qualification isn't mandatory. And I believe this role should require formal qualifications. The NDIS should have a minimum requirement for employment in these areas. Great point there,
So there's
Rebecca.
no Cert 3 anymore. I remember
It's
we had to
there, but
do
it's not
Cert 4s.
mandatory. Mm. So most organisations say it's desirable that you've either got it or you're working towards it.
What would be the rationale to not make it mandatory?
The fact that we wouldn't have sufficient workforce, I suspect.
So we lower the standards to get more numbers in the
But
door.
I think that's what it would be. That if they brought a mandatory standard in, we probably wouldn't have sufficient workers.
Hmm.
I don't know what other people's opinions are, but that I would say that's top of my list.
If we were
And
going to bring in a mandatory qualification, then we need to pay people fairly.
yeah, absolutely. And that might be another element. We'd have to pay people more. They might earn more from support work than they could at a weekend in McDonald's. David Morris says, I haven't found so much resistance, but more difficulty with scheduling staff training. Sorry about that. And providers being willing to allocate the needed number of hours to train all their staff when the funding isn't there in the participants plan. Ultimately, there are so many foundational skills and knowledge base that is really essentials for support workers, and would be handled by a minimum Cert 4 training, like is required for youth workers.
Yeah.
Uh, not not that that has provided perfectly trained support workers in that space, but at least they're starting with something, and it's an introduction to best practices and trauma-informed care. Really great point there. Um, Rebecca then came back with, we provide, I'm assuming sort of thing it's the same person, but we provide training, but the staff need to come in with some knowledge already in order for it to actually work. And there's a few people agreeing with those points as well.
Yeah. And Rebecca's saying seeing it as a stepping stone. A lot of people seeing it,
Mm,
as entry level stepping stone into something else.
yeah, nursing social work.
They don't see it as a
And not,
career.
no, although don't forget that a lot of us all started out as support workers or whatever. Like I started out working as a nursery nurse in special schools. That was
Yeah.
where my career started out. Um, and then somebody said a middle ground between the psychology framework for supervision would be great to introduce into PBS.
Yeah. I did.
Yeah, and
Rebecca
we've got a
started
few
support
people
worker.
who
I did
started as
too.
support workers.
I
I
did
did.
too. I was a support worker and I worked in the houses and we had we at the time, this was 20 years ago now when I first moved here. It was right around deinstitutionalization, so they're just shutting down Q cottages, the asylum, whatever the Q have whatever nomenclature they give it. And so there was a real emphasis on community-based support. And I say that in the best way, in that there was a real investment in all of the staff going into the houses. We all had to have at least Cert 4s. We all had to be trained in person-centered active support. We were all trained in PBS. We were all trained in functional communication, like all the things that I was talking. And that's what gave me the idea of like, gosh, if we could go back to block funding, because actually making this support front-loaded going into the workforce, maybe that not only would lead to better outcomes, but
Mm,
maybe prevent the use of needing a behavior support plan at all. Maybe it would go a lot towards if people are paid a little bit more, felt a bit valued, supported with the training and support that they need. Maybe they won't be bouncing around to different jobs. Maybe they will see it as a career if there's a pathway for progression. Um,
yeah.
there's opportunity there. It just feels like a lot of loose ends.
Yeah, absolutely. But and a lot of loose ends. You know, the more you talk, the more loose ends you start to see, you know? And I think that's it does very much feel sometimes like we had this great idea, you know, to individualize things and give people choice. Um, we put it all out there and now we're trying to rein it back in. That's
Yeah.
kind of how it feels.
And
So
you said that like about was retroactively
yeah,
safeguarding or putting in safeguards after the
yeah,
fact.
yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew's given a breakdown of what it takes to become a board approved psychology supervisor in Australia, which is it's pretty
Comprehensive.
comprehensive,
Yeah.
so people can
Good.
see that there.
Great.
Um, Rebecca's also agreed she couldn't do a role as well. She feels if she hadn't be a support worker, and it's a great foundation for this role, says Sarah.
Really is.
So yeah, so some really good agreement there. But a lot of people that do BSP are registered psychologists or social workers. Yeah.
Mm, mm. So I guess getting back to this idea of how we can be person-centered and focused on the quality as well as the compliance while managing everything else. Like, how do we do that? What advice do you give your supervisees when they feel so burned out and so frustrated and so demoralized? What do you tell them?
The first thing I do say to them, and I hope there's nobody on here from my family because they'd say, well, you're not taking your own advice, is give yourself a break. It is the first thing I sort of say is, first of all, what are you doing for you? And I'm increasingly concerned. I have become increasingly concerned, partly because of my role as a supervisor, that all the changes and the environment we're working in is having a detrimental impact on a lot of the people I supervise.
Mm,
So, for my part, I've been trying to develop a few well-being activities for them and provide well-being information because I feel as a supervisor that's part of my role. But then also, secondary to that, because if they're not okay, they can't do that work.
mm,
So then secondary to that, it's getting them to try and prioritize the pieces of work that they've got to do in order to ensure that they are providing it and a quality, a quality. And we all work in different ways. So another question I'll invariably ask people is, tell me what your caseload is at the moment.
mm,
And because I have a rough idea, but people's caseload will vary. And sometimes I then have that conversation to say, well, you know, do, should you be carrying the caseload you're carrying at the moment? And what are the options for moving that around, even if it's within your own organization? I've had a conversation like that on Monday with somebody about, okay, you don't want to move these people on, so let's look at how we can create space for you while still managing the workload. So the suggestion was, and this is a little bit controversial, so stick with me, that she looked to bring a proficient or higher level practitioner into the organization, either on a contract or short term basis as an employee, that she worked alongside them in managing the cases, which would free up some of her time to manage some of the other stuff that was concerning her around the quality and the delivery of other stuff in the organization and support the other new practitioners that they had taken on in the organization, whilst not moving away from her own caseload. And
mm.
there would probably be an opportunity for that person to stay longer with that organisation if they chose to do so. So I also try and look for creative and innovative ways without breaching legislation as well, because that's the important thing, and without jettisoning clients, because this is the other thing. We work with people, and what we don't want to be doing is having to see services for somebody simply because other stuff has started moving in the periphery and the compliance requirements has changed and all this stuff. And from my perspective, not just that individual, but other people I'm working with at the moment, I would say it's those things that have caused the extra pressure that has
Mm.
required them to pivot slightly. And that's then caused additional pressure from their caseload.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, so it's try and be innovative, think creatively and outside the box about how you can release that pressure if you're feeling that pressure, particularly those of you who run organizations, because you are doing an amazing, amazing job. You're not only employing people, you're delivering a really well needed service, but that shouldn't be at the expense of your health.
No. And I always tell my supervisees and my colleagues when they come to me with this question or this load that they're carrying, And people often talk about a work-life balance, and I
Mm.
find that a bit wanky. And honestly, we know, I'm sorry, but we do. And I'd say to people, like, yeah, people tell you about a work-life balance, but it's really important to find balance within your work, and to find the bits that really energize you, as well as the bits that, really drag you down. Because if you, like, I know for me that if I have more than a few really high risk, really like, significant cases that I'm working on or situations, like, there's only so much of that I can manage. Like, I might need two or three of those really, really tricky cases, but then I might need some easier ones as well, or something, or maybe I just need to do more supervision or something. Like, I need to sometimes focus, especially when I feel so overwhelmed and so heavy and find myself looking at like jobs at 3 a.m. Like, maybe I can be a guide dog trainer, like those times. And I'm like, okay, let me just pause. Let me just see what about this role really energizes me? What do I look forward to doing? What about it really drags me down? And how can I balance these
Yeah.
things?
Well, let me give you old lady advice now. Is what happens when you get as old as me is you're only prepared to do the stuff that really floats your boat
Hmm.
because your patience for the stuff that doesn't has run out, frankly. So my workload, I said to somebody this morning, I had a meeting at 9 o'clock, and this person started off by saying, "Oh, we came into work early this morning." And I said, "Oh, that's lovely. What time, what time did you come in? We're having this conversation." They said 8:30. She said, when do you usually start? I said, "Well, any time between 6 and 7, but if I'm writing a research paper about 5 in the morning, because that's when I'm at my best."
Hmm.
Now, I'm prepared to be sat at my desk, at 6 in the morning and finish at 6 at night. But the reason is everything I do really floats my boat. There's nothing in my workload I don't really enjoy. Because I've even moved the accounting and invoicing now, which is a relief for anybody who gets invoices from me, but also for anybody else who has contact with me, because I'm just not good with that stuff. So that's been moved. I've got a bookkeeper now doing all that, and I've got an administrator who's helping me. So I'm starting to do all those things. So, I suppose my advice would be sooner rather than later, consider what are the things that do float your boat
Hmm.
and play to your strengths, because the things that float your boat will be the things you're really good at. Play to your strengths and find the other people in your network or in your surrounding who are skilled at the things that you're less skilled at, because they will be there, and rely on them to help you. And, do that old fashioned medieval exchange of, if I do this piece for you, you do this piece for that. Somebody said, I relate to this so hard. Rebecca. Yeah. So finding the stuff that you really,
Hmm.
because this is the other thing, there isn't going to be one person who's motivated enough to be in this conversation now who doesn't really enjoy this work, isn't, you know hasn't been drawn to this work for some reason. They might be
Yeah.
feeling today like this isn't a job they want to do, but it doesn't mean it isn't. It just means they need to refocus. And at this time of the year as well, and it will get
Yeah.
worse over the next few weeks, we can all see the end of the year in sight. And I think it's really important to focus as well on, what you've done really well, what you've achieved,
Yeah.
and how much you've achieved collectively.
And I always say to people too that, like, it can feel like so much. It's like, that there's so much to do, so much to learn, so many things to try, so many things to manage and keep in your head. And I always say to people, like, you can't do everything. And sometimes you just choose one thing to do and you do it really well, and that's
Mm,
okay.
mm.
You do what you can to get
People have
through.
these KPIs though, don't they?
Well, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Yeah, they do have
Yeah,
KPIs.
let's not get into that.
That's another conversation. We
Because
only have 10
yeah,
minutes left.
we've got 10 minutes left, and yeah, that's a whole new conversation. But I could
Yeah.
never work under KPIs. You'd never get,
It is stressful.
yeah.
It's funny because I've run organizations. So I've run two different businesses now within the NDIS. One, I had an employee model, and the other I have a subcontracting model. And both had their pros and cons. But the thing I hated most about the employee model was having to have KPIs and chase
Mm,
people for them to meet that overhead. Like, I didn't want to be someone's nanny and be like, you didn't do your, like, oh, just. Yeah. But that was for me.
Mm,
And that's why I run my business as a subcontracting model, but I take very few subcontractors and all my
mm,
subcontractors are, at least specialists advanced with that I know can run their own show, but we have
mm,
really tight safeguards around that too.
mm,
And I do wonder if the NDIS is going to do anything or make any sort of minimum standards around who can subcontract because I don't mean to offend anybody in here, but I really don't think it's safe for anybody, for new starters or core people to be subcontracting in this space. That's my personal opinion. From a risk and a compliance and a human rights perspective, I just think it's such a learning curve. I do wonder if other people share that opinion or if the NDIS is going to look at something like that too. What do you
mm.
think?
Um, I I'm worried. I worry more for the practitioners
Yeah,
who
that's
do
what I
are doing
mean.
that. I think they're at a massive
It's the
risk
practitioners that I worry
because,
about.
we should have a preceptorship model, is my view. I think we had a missed opportunity. If we're expecting the sector to train its own, we're expecting the sector to train the sector. That's
Yeah.
what was being expected of us. And we were expected to do that through supervision, miraculously. Interesting. Anyway, what I would say about that is um, that we should have really gone down the route of a preceptorship model so that new entry practitioners we had a clear route to supporting them. So capability
Mhm.
talks about how we get to capability and how we measure it. What the preceptorship model does is take care of those new entry practitioners to ensure that we have a process to follow and a framework to follow in giving them those skills.
Right.
And that's what's missing, I believe.
Yes.
So people are expected to learn on the job. If I, yeah, I
And they don't know what
wouldn't.
they don't know and they're not
No, and
learning
I
it.
wouldn't have wanted to be working in this system with some of
And
the
the
first behaviour
commission does
support
not
plans I
care.
wrote.
They don't care. Like, and that's the other thing. You have a very unforgiving commission when it comes to fines and things like that. Like, if you don't know, if your supervisor didn't teach you what you're supposed to know around restrictive practices, the commission's not going to care. If you didn't get that report in late, or if you missed a restrictive practice or something, and that's on the lighter side of things. When it like a fine is not the worst outcome that can happen here. You and I both know.
No, no, no. I do worry for those new entry practitioners who are sort of coming in and have less safeguards, I suppose, around them than
Yeah,
perhaps
just
I
twisting
had
in
in
the
my early
wind.
career. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about people being set up to fail, is that
Mm.
it's I really do feel for new entry and core people coming
Mm.
into this sector now because it feels quite chaotic and it's like, okay, we have to have some direction out of here.
But
And
but this is one of the reasons that I set up that, the leadership thing that I've
yeah,
set up
yeah,
because nobody's going to come to our rescue. Nobody's going to sort this for us. Let's be fair. We'll have another government piece of paper that tells us what we should be doing, but they're not going to come to the rescue and do it for us, I don't believe. So, as a sector, we've got to do this for ourselves.
we have to rescue ourselves.
We have to rescue ourselves. We have to provide that leadership, and trying to be positive about it. I see so much good in the people I come across, so much will. I love going to events or attending conferences and hearing the stories in the room of people, of practitioners, and hearing that enthusiasm, because it's so contagious. And so, what I know is we have an amazing workforce out there,
Mm,
So,
mm.
for all these sort of difficulties we've discussed, we do have an amazing workforce out there. But we have to show our leadership from within. We've got to grow that leadership from within so that we've got future leaders to keep moving things forward and to ensure that the human rights of people aren't forgotten and that box continues to be banged by people who see it firsthand, really.
Yeah,
And I'm not trying to take it away from people with lived experience or families. I know they do an amazing job of that as well. But my role here is to think about my colleagues in the sector, and we have to help each other. Because
Yeah.
if we don't, no one else is coming. There's not a boat coming down the river that's going to sort us all out and say, here's the pathway to righteousness in PBS. It's not
I have
happening.
come to save
Yeah.
you.
No, we've got
Great.
to
Where
sort
have you
ourselves
been?
out. Yeah.
You're right. And it is easy to get stuck in the problem. And I find myself getting stuck in that negativity loop too, because I do see so many good practitioners who are out there. And that's what I mean when I say set up to fail.
Mm.
They're not able, or they're not being set up to be the great practitioners that we know that is there because of all these this system and the barriers that exist, that if we
Yeah.
can make some small changes, like not only will practitioners flourish, the sector will start to heal a bit too, I think,
Yeah.
if we can take
But
a more
I
holistic
suppose,
lens.
sorry,
No, you're right.
I suppose what I'd say is like all of us, whatever stage we are in our career, have the capacity to go out and change one thing for someone else, a colleague, I mean. So when you have that opportunity, do that. Because I'm in a fortuitous position that I was able to, with a colleague, set up this emerging leaders course and also do the leadership awards. I'm doing those things not because I think, oh, that makes me look like a nice person. I'm actually doing that because we've got to step up to the plate and put a spotlight on leadership in our sector and growth in our sector. And we have to take responsibility for that. So this is me taking my bit of responsibility, but all of us can take some responsibility too. You don't have to do something massive, just do something, one thing for
That
one
one
person.
thing. Yeah, that one thing can make a real difference.
Yeah.
And you are a nice person.
I'm sure there's some people who don't like me. You can't be liked by everybody.
Well, that's what I say. You could be the sweetest peach on the tree, but not everyone likes peaches.
No, that's true.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Where do we want to wrap this up? Now I feel like I'm just like doom and gloom with NDIS. Like
Yeah.
it's good to have a check-in now because you can get bogged down, um, especially if you don't work in a large team or like in a group setting. Like I think carrying and ruminating these difficulties and when you're in it can become a bit of a loop too. So that's another reason why it's nice to have these conversations and just share that
Yes.
perspective to go, actually, yes, but there's some good things happening too. And how
And
can
and
we?
yeah, I'd say to anybody who's in that position, find those communities of practice that are online,
Yes,
look for opportunities to attend, even small events. Just go and meet your people, find your people, because that will give you the sanity check you might just need. Is there any other questions or points in the last few minutes we might have? Oh,
that's a good one. So Donna's saying my initiation to behavior support was minimal, and I was basically told you'll be okay, just do the best you can. I was uncomfortable, but I was given a caseload of high needs, complex clients. I have since engaged with my own external supervisor, completed a graduate certificate of ABA, and have now moved on to completing the master's of ABA. So I know I'm doing the best for the
wow.
clients and that I can do the best of my ability. Good on you, Donna. Well done.
Yeah, well done, Donna.
Excellent. Way to be the change that you want to see. And
Yeah,
I guess that's what Sharon's saying. And that's what you're saying is to, no one's coming to rescue us. Rescue yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
I will say we are, for those of you who don't know, I sit on a leadership team for the complex behavior community of practice. We have a pretty killer meeting coming up next week it's online. It's between 11 and 1, and it's on the rights-based model of positive behavior support that Dr. Russ Fox and Dr. Aaron Leaf wrote about, and they're going to come and present that model at the community practice meeting online next Wednesday. And I'm going to let a sneak peek know that we are also in the very early stages of looking at a in-person seminar or forum focused on PBS implementation that is going to take place early next year.
Oh, fabulous. Let
Yeah,
me know the
so
date.
I will. So we're gonna have a lineup of speakers. We'll be able to offer it'll be here in Melbourne, and we'll give the information out. We'll run it at cost, so we'll try to keep it as it's nonprofit because it's a nonprofit group. But that's another thing. Like you want to come in person. We're going to focus on PBS implementation. We'll have a roster of speakers. We'll advertise it all, but keep an eye out for that too. So there are cool things happening, and you can take it upon yourself as well to move into this space. Um, You're going to be offering the emerging leaders next year again, you think?
I hope so. Yeah.
Really
It
good.
relies on me conning people into speaking for free.
You can do that.
So, yeah, I've managed this year to find a really good lineup, so we can give it another go next year. So I'd like to, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to. Last year I offered an award, and that was great. It covered two people, and they got to speak at a conference. But then I thought, what can I do that helps more people and potentially the sector too? So yeah, I'd like to do something like that again. Mm.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us over your lunch break.